All right. So we took a couple of weeks off from our study through Christmas and New Year's. We figured folks weren't going to be around. So I kind of guess that folks are a bit
I gotta get
rusty.
my fan on. It's getting hot in here.
Getting hot in here on this January 4th in Richard's house is too warm. Down here in the basement, it is very cold.
Oh,
So I'm gonna share my screen real quick. Share this one so you can see the timeline that we've been working with. So my very brief 30,000 feet flyby overview as to where we've been so far. Our story began with the end of Jerusalem, Judea, Israel, the whole kit and caboodle. That all of that whole kingdom of the people of God that had been built had been torn down, the temple torn down to its foundations, the Ark of the Covenant and the tablets of the Ten Commandments and all those good things that were inside of it carried off to Babylon. Some of it lost to history, some of it would find its way back, but just a lot lost. The religion and the worship in those days was primarily a when I say a cultic religion, I don't mean like cultic in the way of like a dangerous cult where people take advantage of you, but in that the focus on the thing was the ritual practices in the temple. So the sacrifices and all of that the priests did. The whole relationship of Israel to their God took place in the temple by the priests for the people. So once the temple's gone, everything is gone. And the Babylonians take away all of the rich, all of the priests, all of the politicians, everyone who has any influence or land or property or weapons or any use to them, take them out of the land and bring them up into Babylon, where they made a little Jewish district in Babylon and ruled over the land. We think like we don't really know how many people were left. Probably like I think probably the estimate that I like the most is that like at least 60% of the people were left behind, but they were mostly the poor, the working class, the folks whose names don't always get written down and whose histories don't get remembered. And so when the Persians take over Babylon and King Cyrus changes the empire strategy and decides it's much easier to rule an empire when the people like you, and so we're going to send everyone back to their hometowns and we're going to give them the money to rebuild their temples and their cities and all this stuff. He did this across Mesopotamia and the ancient Near East, and sent the early folks back, and we got that right around here, allowed them to return to Jerusalem. When they returned, this very small, intrepid group of probably younger people who have more vitality and less to lose, they put down the foundations of, well, they didn't put down the foundations of the temple. They found the place where the altar was, and they rebuilt the altar in just kind of an open air setting without walls, without any of the gold and various accoutrements. They just built an altar so they could get back to the simplicity of worship. And they had that for 2 years before they started building the temple. And then we read that there was some drama and some people came along and they stopped construction and used kind of shady legal back channels to get them to stop. And they stopped for a while, and that's when we get Haggai and Zechariah and these prophets who stand up and they go, hey, you people who risked it all to return here to the land of God, to rebuild this thing, to be a new people purifying this land, you give up so easily? Come on. you're better than this. And so they use the same legal channels to not only get the right to build back, but also get more resources than they had before. So then the temple gets dedicated, though the people there are not having a great time with their neighbors. This sort of 60% of people who got left behind in maybe over 2 generations or so intermarried with some of their local folks. Their religion's a little bit different because remember, the priests all left, and so all of the kind of orthodox belief systems that the priests and the religious folks had that left with them, and nobody was teaching the lower class anything about their religion, just how to practice it, not what it meant. So they were kind of working off of what they understood. And so when the priests and the rich folks all came back, there was this clash, and there's this argument about who is pure and who is truly the good people of God. And we were setting up some weird tensions last week that we foreshadowed were going to be a bigger deal in the future. And so we are right here in 515-ish when our story resumes from the end of chapter when is that? From the end of chapter 6. So that they aided on the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. They were joyful, they celebrated the Passover. Chapter 7 begins with the words, "After this, in the reign of King Artaxerxes of Persia." So if you were reading in a book and it said, "After this," how long would you think that was? Like a week, a month, couple months? No. The gap between chapters 6 and 7 is this long. It is, where's Ezra? There's Ezra. It's about 50 years. 53 years.
I was just reading in chapter 6 where it's set for chapter 11. Furthermore, I decree if anyone alters this edict, a beam shall be pulled out of the house of the perpetrator, who then shall be impaled on it. The house shall be made a dunghill.
It's vivid.
I'm gonna pull a big old plank from your house and I'm gonna impale you on it. So don't go against me. Sorry.
Do you have a theological connection from that?
No,
Can you
I just
that
think
line?
it's fabulous that this king is like throwing his weight around and threatening to impale someone with a log from their own house.
No, that's the king of Persia saying that, right?
Yeah.
Don't mess with the king of Persia.
Sorry. That's no purpose other than hilarious.
Other than hilarious. You like the fact that it's efficient. Like they're using, we're not going to waste any boards, any wood that we have. We're just going to use one from your house because it's your house.
Petty.
So chapter 7, verse 1, after this.
After
Means
this.
53 years. So there has now passed, in the span of 2 words, 53 years, in which the temple has been rebuilt. It's not a very nice temple. Compared to Solomon's splendorous temple, this one is really kind of humble in many ways. But 53 years of this kind of awkward stalemate between the people who are the descendants of the folks who left into exile and then came back, versus the people of the descendants of the people who stayed. 53 years of the question of who are really the children of God. Who are really God's people? Is it the people who had all of the religious control, who also maybe got tainted by Babylon? Or the people who did all of the work and who stayed in the land, but didn't have any of the religious education? I think we probably are dealing with some of that in our churches now, and how do we equip leaders? How do we there's like the group of people who are old school in church and, you know, with doctorates and everything, and then there's the folks who you know, are ordained by the local church and have never been to school in their life, but feel the calling of God on their lives. And I don't know, we're dealing with that. How do we maintain some kind of unity in the midst of that? But that's maybe a different study. So
Rings a bell.
So before we get into the actual text of the thing, we're about to meet Ezra. Off the top of your head, and I hope this isn't, off the top of your head, what can you tell me about Ezra? Anything?
He was a prophet.
Prophet.
Yeah. I was gonna say.
Okay. What else? Anything?
He was probably 5'10".
That would have been pretty tall, I think, in those days.
Definitely short.
Oh, he had one of the shortest names in the scriptures.
Yeah. Not the tallest, not the shortest person in the Bible. That would be Nehemiah. That's a pun. Nehemiah. He's knee-high. He's very small. Rough crowd tonight. That's fine. We're good. Everyone's fine. So in Christian circles, we don't talk about Ezra, like, ever at all. But in Jewish circles, he is he's widely considered the founder of Judaism.
Wow.
Yeah. And here I'm going to make a distinction between I don't even know the right word, like the religion of the Israelites and Judaism. And even you think modern Judaism as a religion doesn't start until the 1st century AD, about the same time that Christianity does. We branch off of the same trunk. But Judaism as a religion doesn't exist until Ezra's time. Like I said, it's the Jewish religion, the Israelite religion, is one that is practiced. It's ritualistic. There's sacrifices, there's feast days, there's things that you do, but there's not a whole lot of like religious teaching and things that you have to believe about God. And you know, moral.
Was it full of laws? You know, all the law, be about 600 laws of the Jewish people.
So good point. Most of the laws that we read about in the Torah were originally meant for the priests and Levites only. So your average person was not responsible to follow really any of the laws of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, with a few exceptions. The people were supposed to, like, you know, be cool to one another. Just generally don't be jerks. But then everything else about the ways that you're supposed to stay pure and don't touch this and do touch that.
Yeah, right.
All of that that is just about ritual purity, and the average Joe and Jane doesn't go into the temple or anywhere near the temple, and so they don't have to worry about being ritually clean. So there's not like it's not a heart religion like we think about religion today, where it's like,
Did they have something comparable to the Pharisees at that time, or the beginnings of it? No.
nope, no Pharisees, no Sadducees, nothing. They got no sects. They've got no Bible at this point. There is no
Okay.
physical Bible. There is no written
Right.
text yet. The priests and Levites, surely they had some written things. They had a lot of liturgies and music and songs, and they had ways of, do this, don't do that when you're preparing for the sacrifice. But in terms of like a laid out scripture with like laws
They
and
have to
morality,
hire somebody to turn out the lights on the Sabbath.
well, you mean like today? Like if
Yeah,
you're
right.
like really
Yeah,
strict.
my brother used to I guess they gave him 10 cents to turn out the lights in their home on the Sabbath.
So it's a really strict circles today where they will not do any work on the Sabbath. I used to live above a synagogue, and I would do their cleaning for them because no one in their congregation could do it.
Yeah, I grew up in a mixed neighborhood in Borough Park, Brooklyn, 1940s and 50s. And so we had quite a few Hasidic Jews, and
Okay.
they needed their lights turned out. Other chores that had to be done on that day, my brother would attend to.
So Ezra
Yeah.
is a well-regarded scribe and priest in Babylon. So he's super smart. He's like the brightest person they got up there. Later rabbinic traditions would say that he is the only person other than Moses to properly pronounce the name of God. Because the what we would say Yahweh, they would say is unpronounceable. Not just that you're not supposed to say it, but like the vowels of that are unknown and unpronounceable to the human tongue. That the Yahweh Vaheh, how that works itself out. So it's just Ezra and Moses are the only people ever to be able to say the name of God properly. He was that holy. Ezra is the guy, he puts together the rule of law, the religious rule. He takes all of the writings that had existed before, all of the oral traditions that people had passed down for thousands of years, from this grandma to this grandma to this grandma, and all the things that the priests had believed amongst themselves, and he takes all of this and he edits them together and forms what we know of now as the Hebrew scriptures. He is the guy probably that is the editor of the Torah. So this is why we read Genesis 1 and then we read Genesis 2, and they're two separate creation stories, because they were probably two separate traditions. And Ezra and his crew, they're like, well, the people here, this is their creation narrative, but the people who lived over here, this is their creation narrative. And, they don't contradict each other in general terms, and they're both really valuable to these people, so we're going to include them both. And so if you study really closely all of the parts of the Hebrew scriptures, you'll see it reads like a group project, like in school, where everyone's writing a little bit. And he's probably the guy who's in charge of putting that together. He writes 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which is the history of Israel. He writes the book of Ezra. He invents the calendar that they still use today. He puts together the assembly, which, because they didn't have priests and everything, most of the priests stayed up in Babylon. The assembly is kind of like the Avengers or the Super Friends or the Justice League, like the all-stars of their time, who is kind of like a who's who of the best scholars in Jewish history, who all get together and work out all of these things that will then become the religion of Judaism. So a lot of that is not in the book that we're reading right now. A lot of that comes from later histories, from historians, from the Talmud, from tradition. But he is credited with basically taking these group of people who believed a thing about their God and who practiced a thing, but then were separated by empires who conquered them and dragged their people in different places, who then developed different rituals and beliefs in different places, of taking all of that and forming a cohesive whole out of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he is kind of a superstar in that regard.
Mm.
So, okay, so that's who he is. So we can look at how he shows up then in the story. Did anybody get a chance to read the text beforehand? It's okay if you didn't.
Yeah, I read chapters, I guess 7 and 8.
Okay.
And what stands out most in my mind are all the names, but I don't remember them all.
Well, that's fine. You're not supposed to remember them all.
But yeah, I got some of the impressions that you shared.
Well, hey, how about the way that it starts? After this, in the reign of King Artaxerxes of Persia, Ezra, son of Sariah, son of Azariah, son of Hilkiah, son of Shallum, son of Zadok, son of Ahitub, son of Amariah, son of Azariah, son of Marioth, son of Zechariah, son of Uzzah, son of Buki, son of Abishua, son of Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of the chief priest Aaron.
You can't help but not recognize the importance of sons.
But you got to the right one, right?
Right.
You saw where it ended, right? Like, that's what matters in that long line of names.
Right.
That this is a man, this Ezra, can trace his lineage directly to Aaron, the first priest, right? The brother of Moses.
Okay.
Oh, she's back with us. Hi. And she's being featured. Look at that. And on my screen anyway.
Okay.
Well, now you're featured, Zach. Yeah, you're featured. Yeah, I got the 4 small screens and then 1 big screen. You're featured on the big screen right now.
Okay.
As
I
well
lost
as
my thought. There was
as well as the little screen.
There was a connection to that. That
Aaron, brother of Moses, he had a descendancy.
There
Like,
you go.
The
I
priest
wonder
of the priest.
I wonder if when you talk, you get on a big screen.
Yep, that's how it works. When the person who talks,
Yeah. So I'm up on a big screen when I talk.
if a person has it set that way, yeah.
That's okay. That's fine. I'm glad to be on a little screen.
Okay.
You make a bigger screen image, a better screen, big screen image.
It is so it's important, I guess, that Ezra is connected directly in the line, right? Because what's predicating all the problems here is that who's the legitimate heir? Who's really the child of God?
Would he have been one of the ones that went into exile then? Would Ezra have been in exile, or would he have stayed?
Ezra was born in Babylon.
I think one of the last times of our Bible study, you mentioned how Ezra did quite a bit of editing here and there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't remember exactly where and when, but you had mentioned certain things in that regard.
Yeah, he's his father, or maybe grandfather at this point, maybe even great grandfather, was taken into Babylon. So he's 3 generations deep of people who were born and lived their whole lives in Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
Which is exile. Is that
Yeah.
what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he never saw Jerusalem. His dad never saw Jerusalem, and maybe his dad never saw Jerusalem. Maybe even his dad's dad. We are several generations removed at this point from the promised land.
So whether they knew how to get there.
Well, sure they had MapQuest or something. I don't know. So this guy, he's a scribe, skilled in the law of Moses that the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. And remember, at that point, when it says the law of Moses, this is an oral tradition that has been handed down. This is not, they have not had a book with the words that Moses wrote in his handwriting for 2,000 years at this point. These are oral traditions and stories that are passed down through a lineage like this of father to son and mother to daughter, and
good memories.
And so the king grants him permission to go, because there have been, at this point, like 60 years of people going back in waves. They're rebuilding things. They're restarting things slowly but surely, the way that it is. And I think the time has come to restart in earnest our religion, as it were, if they would even call it that. So he gets together a motley crew of about 5,000 people. And there's a letter here starting in verse 11 from the king, commending him to go to Jerusalem with all of the people that he needs, and all of the money that he needs, and all of the silver and gold and wheat and wine and all of that. It's basically enough for 2 years worth of worship sacrifices.
I'll be back in a couple minutes.
Okay, Richard. I actually really love this.
Who knows? I may hear it where I'm going.
Okay. I actually really love that detail, by the way, that what they were given in terms of money and wheat and all of that was enough to keep the temple going for 2 years, which is basically what the Penn Southeast Conference did for Open Table, right? We presented a vision to the conference consistory, the conference staff, and said, we think God is moving in this way and wants to use us in this way, and we want to go into this place and do this thing. We're not able to do that where we just ourselves, we can't just do that. We need financial support in order to do those things. And they said, we'll give you enough for the first 2 years, because that should be enough to get you settled. And if this thing is sustainable, if this is what God is doing, then by that point, you shouldn't need us anymore. And that's essentially what Artaxerxes is doing for Ezra and for the people. I don't know. What kind of emotions, what kind of feelings are you imagining stirred up in this young man who is like, he's probably a bookworm, kind of a nerd, I'm guessing, because he spends all of his time in these old books and he's memorized everything, and he's got this grand idea for the people of God and for this for this grand religious idea, I suppose. And he's got permission for 2 years, basically, to take a group of people back and to try this in real time, in a real place, in a place where they've had a temple for 53 years. What do you think you'd be feeling?
Depends on if he's more like you or more like me. If he's more like you, he's like pumped and can see the sky as the limits. If he's like me, he's like, oh crap, we got like 2 years to do this. How in the world, God? So it all depends on his personality.
Ezra strikes me more like you than me in general.
Okay.
He's very organized.
Okay. So then he's freaking out. He's looking, it's like 2 years. Okay. Yeah, we got to make, no. I'm sure he was thrilled.
Yeah.
Oh,
He might be like, I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
2 years? Oh, hold up.
Right.
I need constant support for my vision, right? The vision God's given me.
Yeah. And then it says that he goes with those supplies from Artaxerxes, and then also with all of the offerings that were given freely from the Jewish people in Babylon. And you'll notice at no point in any of this is the word tithe or 10% mentioned. But all throughout this book, there are stories of people who stayed behind in Babylon, but supported the mission from afar because they believed in it, but they knew that it wasn't their place to go.
that's cool.
Yeah. So,
Kind of reminds me of support of open table. Some people, bring their offerings right to the sanctuary, and others mail it in from their online worshipers, kind of modern version, way modern version of what you speak of.
So he sets out in the beginning of chapter 8. We read that he gathers together, and this is one of those lists, Richard, with just the descendants of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, with him 80 males, with him 28 males, with him, and you're assuming then there's wives and children and all of that included, but he's only counting men. So probably about 5,000 people. Though I will say, we do have evidence from this time period that women actually were treated a lot more fairly than in earlier or later times, which is often the case in times of transition and like pioneering times. When things are still being built, there's a lot more equality than once systems are in place. So we know that women could inherit land, they could own their own property, they could buy and sell property, they could divorce their husbands without getting any special permission. The Talmud, which is written a couple hundred years later, says that women are allowed to divorce their husbands if they don't give them enough pleasure in bed. That is, the women are allowed to do that if the men aren't very compassionate lovers. So in terms of compared to the rest of the ancient Near East, this is actually fairly egalitarian. But we read through this list in chapter 8, but there's something missing from that list. There are no Levites.
The priests.
Yeah, the priests. Like, there are no people there to actually do the religion. And I didn't see any indication as to why there's no one. My guess is that they didn't want to. Ezra is kind of proposing something new, something different. The Levites are the people who do the sacrifices and who do the priestly duties, and Ezra is kind of proposing a new thing. And so those Levites that are still in Babylon might not be so interested in coming to fulfill this guy's vision. We've kind of had an opposite response at Open Table, where it seems that all we're attracting are pastors. We have so many clergy people who see the vision and the mission and want to jump on board. But I think it's often is the case when you're presenting a new idea, a new vision, that the people who are longtime practitioners of the old one feel threatened and don't want to be a part of it. I don't know. Has anybody experienced that in their lives? Not just in church, but in general?
Experience what?
Pushback from the people who have done the thing this way, when you maybe have a different perspective or decide to come at it a different way, or
Interesting here, where in verse 22 of, I guess it's chapter 8, for I was ashamed to ask the king for a band of soldiers and horsemen to protect us against the enemy on our way, since we had told the king the hand of our God is for good upon all that seek him, and the power of his wrath is against all that forsake him, etc.
Yes, that was the next thing I wanted to bring attention to.
Okay.
Because he does find some Levites. It takes a couple of days. They end up being about 2 weeks late to Jerusalem. But they do gather some Levites, so they have the full 12 tribes present. And when it comes time to set out, that little part right there, verses 21 through 23, part of that you read, where before they leave, they fast, they pray, they devote themselves entirely to God and pray for a safe journey for themselves, for their children, and for the ridiculous amount of treasure that they're carrying with them.
Oh, yes.
Imagine 5,000 people, and they are carrying probably the equivalent of 5 tons of gold.
Wow.
Tons. 5 tons of gold and 4 tons of silver. And they have no military protection. Because Richard, read that why didn't he ask for military aid from the king? What was his reason?
Huh? What verse?
Well, you just read it. It was the first part of verse 22. Why didn't he ask for soldiers?
Yeah. Well, he said, for I am ashamed to ask the king for a band of soldiers and horsemen to protect us against the enemy of our way, since we had told the king, the hand of our God is for good upon all that seek him. Wow, that's profound. And the power of his wrath is against all that forsake him. Wow, I think, we need a partnership there.
Yeah.
But, he shouldn't have felt so bad about having this partnership.
I mean, but
especially
I have felt this way so many times, where I'm like, well, I mean, I'll pray for other people, but I'm not actually going to believe that for me, that's not going to work for me, right? Like, I'll pray for healing over this thing, but I don't really believe it's going to happen. And Ezra
Yeah.
goes, if I'm going
Another
to step out in
aspect.
faith and say God
Yeah.
is calling us to do this thing,
Yeah.
and God is powerful and God will bring us to this thing, I
Yeah.
need to actually live it. Right? And so asking for military protection is telling God, I don't actually believe that you're going to do this thing or that you're in this thing.
Yeah. Of course, I think we've come to realize today that, we have a partnership with God, and that we have to gain some guidance from God and how we may work together with God. And sometimes this comes into, at this point in our history of civilization, it involves military, as in the case of the Ukraine. We can't just let, just leave it up to, so to say, God, and not realize that, we're a part of God, and we have to work together with God in this regard. Yeah, so that's, I'm so glad that the USA is doing what we think we can to help out Ukraine.
Okay. Well, I see your connection. I think I see the connection you're making with the military part. I think probably what a more direct
Yeah.
metaphor here,
Uh-huh.
what he's saying might be like, I'm going to actually act like God is capable of doing the things that I claim God is capable of doing.
Yeah.
If I believe in God's protection, then I need to live as if I do and not make contingency plans for if God's asleep or at the wheel or something. You know how many times in the past year I've been terrified that like things are not going to work out financially. We are going to lose every single thing. And then I ask myself, do I actually believe that God is calling me to this thing? Or is this just me being impulsive? And I genuinely think this is God calling me to it. And so if I believe that God is calling me to it, then I also
Right,
believe that
right.
God is bringing me through it. And
Yeah. I think he kind of brought the two together in himself when he called out to the king and asked for, some protection here. That, that this is what God wants for me. And, sometimes God wants to do it from earth up.
yeah.
Instead of totally from raining heaven down.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So many ways of thinking of this, but I've gotten to the point in my life where, we got a partnership going on here. I don't know to what extent they realized it in Ezra's time, but there's this human divine partnership where we have to work together to bring these things about here on earth. I mean, God doesn't expect himself to do it all. We have to, work together with God to bring these things into reality, in quotes.
Yeah. I can't remember who it is that that says that prayer is only the first step. Like if you see a person in need, you're supposed to pray for them and then you're supposed to help them. Like,
yeah,
partnership with God. You ask God for help and then you go be the help.
Part of that's the essential part of the connection. Prayer. Yeah. Yeah. In one form or another, as Ezra prayed it or otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
they
mean,
don't get.
I can understand where Ezra's coming from.
So he stepped out in faith again and decided that if I actually believe that God is calling us to this, then I also believe that God will keep us safe through it. And we read that he did, that they walked that whole way with that much stuff and that many people. That process probably took a couple of months of walking, of travel, of being very vulnerable out on the road, but God watched over them, kept them safe, was able to bring all of that back. And then if I can, if somebody can read Ezra chapter 8, verses 31 to 36. So that's 31 to the end of the chapter.
I feel like verse 28 is really beautiful too.
Okay.
Then
And I said to them, you are holy to the Lord, and the vessels are holy. Like, it's not just these things, like you
That is awesome. Yeah.
are holy to the Lord.
Yeah.
And the vessels are holy, and the silver and the gold are a free will offering to the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Guard them and keep them until you weigh them before the chief priests and the Levites and the heads of families in Israel at Jerusalem, then the chambers of the house of the Lord. Wait, is that where you wanted me to read? I'm sorry.
Finish the chapter.
Oh, okay. So the priests and Levites took over the silver, the gold, and the vessels as they were weighed out to bring them to Jerusalem to the house of our God. Then we left the river Ahava on the 12th day of the first month to go to Jerusalem. The hand of our God was upon us, and he delivered us from the hand of the enemy and from ambushes along the way. We came to Jerusalem and remained there 3 days. On the 4th day, within the house of our God, the silver, the gold, and the vessels were weighed into the hand of the priest Meremoth, son of Uriah. And with him was Eleazar, son of Phinehas, and with them were the Levites, Jozabad, son of Jeshua, and Noadiah, son of Binnui. The total was counted and weighed, and the weight of everything was recorded. At that time, those who had come from captivity, the returned exiles, offered burnt offerings to the Lord, to the God of Israel, 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, 77 lambs, and as a sin offering, 12 male goats. All this was a burnt offering to the Lord. They also delivered the king's commissions to the king's satraps and to the governors of the province beyond the river, and they supported the people in the house of God.
Amen.
I'm trying to figure out which one it is.
So, did someone have to leave?
Oh yes, David had to leave.
Oh,
I'm trying to see which one. I'm sorry, I had this written down and then I wrote down the wrong name. But one of these people are descendants of, well, here, I'll get it right. Share what you were about to say, and I will show you the right verse, because I think this is a wonderful point that gets missed because we don't know any of these people's names.
yeah. I mean, I just love that verse about, you are holy to the Lord, and the vessels of it. That's most profound to me, anyway, personally.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, to call someone holy is awesome.
Hmm.
Yeah, and what the full dynamics of that would be. I think it just means that, you know, we're endowed with the spirit of God,
Hmm.
more than being created in the image. We're endowed with the spirit to
Hmm.
be considered holy in spite of our imperfections.
Yeah. Breathe.
At some point, I'm going to join Nicole on a snap.
You're gonna do what?
I joined
I've been
Nicole in
munching on Chex Mix the
the
whole
snap.
time.
I have to get my Haagen-Dazs white chocolate raspberry ice cream.
All right, there it is. The Meremoth, son of Uriah, okay, in verse 33.
Of chapter 8?
Yes, that Nicole just read. On the fourth day,
Yeah.
within the house of our God, the silver, the gold, the vessels
Thir-
were weighed.
Yeah,
into
33.
the hands.
Yeah, on the fourth day within the house of our
Right. They were
Yeah.
weighed into the hands of the priest Meremoth, son of Uriah, which is one of those throwaway lines that we just, it doesn't matter, right? It's just one of those names and whatever.
Uriah.
Well, not that Uriah, no.
Okay.
But if we scroll up, we scroll back all the way to chapter 2. So this is like 70 years earlier. When they're talking about that first group of people who are coming in.
Oh, is that what they're referring to here?
Well, wait.
In that verse? Oh, okay.
It's talking about all of these different priests and all these different people, but then it says, also of the descendants of the priests, the descendants of Habiah, Hakoz, and Barzia, who had married one of the daughters of Barzia the Gileadite. These looked for their entries in the genealogical record, but they were not found there. And so they were excluded from the priesthood as unclean. The governor told them that they were not to partake of the most holy food until there should be a priest to consult with the Urim and the Thummim, so the casting of lots. So there's these three families of priests who took the trek from Babylon to Judea, only to find out that their paperwork got lost. And they couldn't prove the fact that they were pure descendants of these priests. And so they were not allowed to do their job in the temple because they couldn't find their paperwork. They basically were undocumented.
Yeah.
So then chapters and chapters later, in this like throwaway line, we learn that one of their descendants is the priest who receives this offering from Ezra, which means that at some point in the last 60 years, they either found the paperwork or somebody made an exception for these people and decided and declared that no, these are good people and they should be able to serve the Lord in this way that they've been called to. So there is just like this little redemption story thrown in there into one of the random names that we would normally just skip our way through as we can't pronounce. And it just makes me think, like, if there is this redemption arc within a name, in a throwaway line, in a descriptive part of like a non-theological, non-preachable place, that there is a redemption arc in that. Like how every word of this scripture is just brimming with redemption. Like every little word, it's just exploding with energy, like the energy inside of an atom that just wants to explode out. And when we read through those lists of names that are just unbearable, I then have to think, like, what are the stories of those people? Where are the stories of redemption in their lives? Because God knows there's probably 100 in each one. And like,
Yeah.
if we only knew, we could unpack each one and hear this story and this story and this story of redemption and salvation and reconciliation, and just all of these goodness stories encapsulated in every one of those names. And it's just such a good reminder that there are no superfluous throwaway names. There are no superfluous throwaway.
That's right. That's a good point. That's a real good point.
Our actual lives.
Yeah, real people with problems and difficulties that they would take to the Lord. And the Lord would respond to them in a positive way.
Yeah.
But once again, it comes back to that partnership. Each person needing to work together with the Lord in his own personal life and family and country.
Yeah. And we talk about issues that we're going to have and problems needing to be reconciled. And we're going to finish out the book of Ezra next week. And I can guarantee you we're going to finish it out because there's just 2 more chapters. And basically, it's going to start off with another one of those after these things had been done. So who knows how many years. It's going to come to light that the people are marrying outside of the chosen few and potentially sullying their good holy seed, and all of the, I don't know, that makes my skin crawl when I read that. And I imagine most people with modern sentiments also have crawly skin when they read.
But could you answer a question about the fellow that was with us? Did he come to us from online? Is he a pastor in the community that I just don't know?
Oh, well, we'll once I hit stop, I'll tell you all about David. But just wanted to say, anyone who's watching online, next week is going to be I'm chock full of uncomfortable things that sound like racism and eugenics and racial purity, and it's weird and uncomfortable, but I think there's some really important things in there that we need to hear. So chapters 9 and 10 next week.
Very interesting.